Hello. Hi, everybody. Hi. Hey, happy Wednesday, May 29th. Welcome to the KEXP Gathering Space. Welcome to the Mixer. Hey, thank you all for coming. My name is Randy Engstrom. I am the acting director of the Office of Film and Music and the director of the Office of Arts and Culture, and also just happy to be here with all of you. Thank you for being here tonight. If you haven't already, please have some of the delicious food. Thank you, that brown girl cooks, Christy Brown. And a drink. Mixing is always easier with a cocktail. Also, courtesy of the Brown family. And thanks for joining us for our first public, outward-facing conversation about what the future of the creative economy in this city could look like. This is the first of many conversations that we're going to be having throughout the summer. And we come into this space not pretending to have answers, but having a lot of questions and starting with a lot of information. One of the things we know is that Seattle is one of the most creative and talented cities on the planet. We know that for a lot of reasons, like the space we're sitting in, like the musicians that play on this station, like the films that are showing in the film festival that's happening right now. Seattle's a city that changes the world a lot, and its music and its creativity and its culture and its film and its entertainment and its theater are all part of that. And we know that the largest foundation on the planet and the richest person in the world and many of the largest companies in the world are located here, and yet there isn't always a clear connection between the booming economy of this city and the creative practitioners who really create its value and identity. And so one of the things that we get to do together over the next 4 months is explore how to close that gap and explore how to really think about those opportunities. So there's a handout that maybe you saw that'll illustrate some of what we're talking about. And this is courtesy of the Office of Film and Music's Creative Economy study that was released a couple of months ago. And one thing I'm not going to do is throw a bunch of numbers at you from the stage or walk you through an economic development study, because that's crazy. But one thing we know is that Seattle has an incredibly large number of performers, artists, musicians, designers, a huge number of those jobs that don't pay as well as we feel like they should. And then we have a tremendous number of software, of creative tech jobs that actually pay incredible. But we also know that access and opportunity to those jobs is inequitable. It's inequitable by gender, it's inequitable by race. So how do we create more equitable opportunities, and how do we become greater advocates for artists and for creatives in general? How do we make this a city that creatives and artists can live and work in? And not just make a living, but make a life. Because I really think that our creative community is what makes this a place that I want to raise my daughter. So it makes it a place that I chose to move to 25 years ago. And it's what I think makes it one of the most exciting cities in the world to be in. And that's because of all of you. Together, we get to co-create what the next 5, 10, or 20 years can look like. I want to give a few shout outs. First, I just want to thank Alex Rose from the OFM staff, who really held down this whole event and is generally amazing. I also want to give some love to all of the film and music and arts and culture staff, Maitwan and Ali and Lara, and there's a whole host of people who helped make this happen, and so thank you for that. Thank you all the staff of Arts and OFM, and to the commissioners, the arts commissioners and music commissioners, and our friends at Washington Filmworks and Northwest Film Forum. You're going to hear from Vivian in just a moment. I also want to give a special shout out to Kate Becker, who held down this office at the Office of Film and Music for 5 years. She's a great leader in our community and now a partner at the county. Kate, thanks for being here tonight. And, you know, I think we're all in this together. We're all in this to figure out how we can chart the most effective road that we can forward. And so we picked the hardest conversation first, art and tech, because there's no tension there. Everything's fine. And I think part of that is because we know there are these incredible opportunities. We have this booming economy, and creative jobs within the context of that sector do exist and are actually plentiful. And there does seem to be a little bit of a disconnect between the value of our creative workforce and the larger economic activity that's coming through those tech companies. So let's fix that. Let's actually sit together and design solutions. And in particular, our charge over the next few months in this and in subsequent conversations is, what role can the city play to actually make things better on the ground for the working creatives of this city? And how can we make this a place of economic opportunity, of affordability, of racial equity? And how do we create a space where we can retain the creative capital that the city needs to continue to pioneer the future? That's why we're here. And the structure of the night is that we're going to hear from a panel of remarkable people who are working at the intersection of creativity and technology. And then we're going to turn it around and just have open conversations. We have a bunch of staff and commissioners here who have agreed to help facilitate some short conversations. We want to capture from you what you think should happen. What can we do as the city to make things better for you? What are the opportunities that exist? Where are we getting it wrong? We need to hear all that feedback because we have a window in time to try to build the best possible plan to improve conditions on the ground for you, for the folks that our offices serve. So with that, I'm going to invite up to the stage someone who I'm a gigantic fan of. She's the executive director of the Northwest Film Forum. She's one of the smartest people I know. She has the best jumpsuit in the whole room, hands down. And she flew in from Detroit, to do this, I think.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Please give it up for Vivian Walk.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks, everyone, for coming out today. I'm going to invite up a couple people in a second, but at first I wanted to kind of ask, how many of you are artists in this room? And how many of you are tech people? And how many of you are both? Okay, cool. So later when we break out into groups, it would be really great for you all to bring your A game and really bring your ideas about how we can make this all better, because there is a lack of dialogue, as obviously we all know, in the middle section. So that aside, I would like to welcome up Sandy Siafi and Netzi Chirango. Hello. Stand, sit, we should sit. So right next to me is Sandy Chiafi, who is the executive director of Fearless 360. She has a very long and impressive biography, but I'm not going to go into the whole thing, as she'll talk about it a little bit. But what you should know is she's been working in the space of art, tech, activism, etc., flying around the world doing all sorts of interesting projects for the past 25 years. And for the past 3 has been doing a lot of research and studies into creative economy work and cultural space work. So this is all relevant. Netzi Chirango was born in South Africa to a Namibian father and an Ethiopian mother.
Namibia,
yes, it's real. And she's a writer, director, and community organizer, so she comes into the VR and filmmaking space with a lot of background in activism and kind of radical Black organizing. So we're going to hear from her, and she will talk about her new documentary short called Dom, about an African-American dominatrix, and her work with Arts Corps as a teaching instructor. Sound good?
absolutely.
Cool. So first off, if you both could just very briefly touch upon how your creative work intersects with technology, that would be great. Broad strokes.
Okay, hi everybody. It's really nice to see everyone come out for a conversation that's framed in this way. That's exciting. And thank you for all of the people who are still working on good government and the idea that working in the commons can matter. Because I think that's what tonight's about. I'll just say briefly, fundamentally, my work, most of my career has been some combination of using media, community, teaching, towards sort of the notion of the public good, whether that public good is actual space or common community beliefs or the stories that we hold and own in a variety of ways. And technologies over those years have largely been understood as tools only. And I guess probably the biggest way I would frame my work is the notion is the creative, the art, the community is driving the tools and the domain of technology rather than just looking at it as a tool.
Can you repeat the question again?
Where does your work as an artist and technology intersect?
Yeah. I think that since I've been working as an artist, there's always been an aspect of technology to what I've been doing. When I was starting out as an organizer, technology had both, it affected the way we lived our lives. It meant that we connected with one another. We were able to, I guess, be united in terms of, we were united in our frames of reference. You know, like we could understand, we had the same ideology, and it didn't mean that you didn't feel as lonely at first. I guess as far as tech goes, I use cameras, I edit with tech. Every aspect of filmmaking has tech to it. And unfortunately, that sometimes means that access to it is a little harder to get. But it can be so meaningful when you actually have the ability to use that stuff.
Can you talk a little bit about your current VR, your recent VR piece? That was your first attempt at kind of more advanced tech filmmaking, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So my piece, Dom, is about my friend Ivana, who is a dominatrix. And she's amazing. And we met each other while doing Radical Black organizing in Seattle. But it also meant that we were planning large actions and not actually learning about our individual experiences. So I think one day we just got to talking about what else she does, and she mentioned this, you know, I wanted to showcase her and her spirit and her personhood, and I got the ability and the chance to do that in virtual reality, which was not how I intended on doing it at all. And I mean, I think it was like incredibly intimidating because I've always seen myself as a writer and as a creative and as an activist, but not as a tech person, you know? This was absolutely not what I had intended. But the more that I started to understand what VR could do, it meant that I could actually honestly depict what the experience is for my friend. It means that she isn't just one version, you know? We were able to replicate my friend in her dumb outfit, and she's doing dumb things, but we also have her, as I met her, as an organizer. We also have her just being taken care of. And we get all of these visions of a person. I think when we think about how representation works, we sometimes see people as one thing or the other. And I enjoy how VR can actually show the complexities of humans.
So I want to talk a little bit about access to VR, because filmmaking, as we all know, is kind of a difficult medium to get into as a person of color, often as a woman, as it is. VR and tech spaces, even more so, especially as an African American. Perhaps both of you can touch upon this. How have you seen kind of the ideas of equity play out in the VR or tech space, and where do you think it can be improved upon?
Okay, so a couple of quick things. The point that you're making about what the reason that you wanted to use that medium was completely connected to the content, and also the fact that you felt that use of technology was specifically about human connection. That ironically, what it's uniquely good at is that. And inside that is the secret to, in many ways, the new economy. And that is where some of artists pushing through the reason you want something that goes beyond placing that story in a regular frame, that need creates new economic value. And unfortunately, along the way, to get there, the tools themselves are often almost impossible to get your hands on, etc. But I would say very briefly that one thing I've seen in this space, and when we say this space, for the sake of this discussion, what I would mean, and certainly I think you're implying, but I don't mean to put words in your mouth, It's the part of immersive media that is being developed for the most part outside of the preponderance of investment in immersive, virtual, and mixed reality, which the last report I read, the preponderance is either gaming or training or medical or military. I think it's there's some rhyming thing about it, but that's the preponderance of investment. But the sort of work that's being done on the edges, whether that's about specific edges of art expression or ways of pushing and bridging connection through portals, all of that work that's being done on the more art or culture and justice side has a tiny investment, and that's the part that we're talking about right now. That part has had from the very beginning incredible organization. The Women in VR organization has done, really from the beginning, has been trying to do right what wasn't done right in indie media in the 80s and 90s. So I do think there are some things that we could talk more about, so that we don't take up too much space here. But there are resources, I think, in immersive media that are better in some ways than they were in traditional media.
I'd be curious if you could elaborate upon that. Actually, like, what are they doing well that we should bring into our spaces?
They have some specific in their manifesto they go through, and they work with conferences, the spaces that give you access to the people who are bringing new software and tools, and you're going to be someone on the front end of being able to understand that paradigm. They're making sure that there are educators who can educate educators in those spaces, most especially out of LA, honestly, there, and Vancouver. There's some here, but we will do more. And then the only other thing I just wanted to say about access is to do all that we can sometimes not to only think of immersive media in the absolutely most expensive high-end spaces, because that's part of what keeps people away from what matters the most, which is the part that your work is addressing, which is why there's so much value in this thing about this technology, which is a combination of helping us understand connection and immersion in digital spaces that we're sharing. We need both of those things very quickly, and nothing's better at it than the very thing you're talking about developing.
And Netzi, so as a teaching artist for ArtScore, you talk a lot about like putting these tools into the hands of youth, and I'm wondering if you could build upon that and what you have seen work and what really excites you about the potential of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think accessibility actually becomes a more complex issue, At the beginning of this pilot program, in which we've been working with students from Big Picture High School, we started to notice that no matter how much we planned, there were some things we could have never predicted. For example, some students just had better access to technology from before, and that made it so that those kids felt more confident in talking about what they were doing and willing to take risks because they knew that they'd already tried. For the students who were, for example, really excited about drawing, 3D modeling seemed really, really like a hurdle that they didn't want to cross. And we saw things like that happen. And so what that meant was that everybody had to do something. You couldn't just choose one thing. We made sure that everybody got to have some experience. And I think that there are certain things that we can do better, when we are doing programs for children, especially children of color, we want to actually give them the tech, take it home, make mistakes with it, and when they're comfortable, it means that we have to feed them, because when else are they going to get fed? It means that maybe we have the classes in the South End, it means that we have to kind of change the way that we are working to benefit the communities who are who get the least amount of representation in the room. I think access it's radical because I live in Rainier Beach and I'm Ethiopian, but I never ever thought of my identity as an Ethiopian also being reflected in VR until I walked across the street and got to see something happening at the Ethiopian Cultural Center. And it never even crossed my mind, And now I'm so excited about the possibilities.
So, one of the first questions that immediately comes to mind, obviously, is okay, yes, we want to put this technology into the hands of youth, but money is this ever-pervasive issue we have to deal with. So, Sandy, you talk a lot about kind of changing the narrative to what are creative economics that we can employ, what are new models we can employ. So what comes to mind for you for models that might be successful?
Yeah, I mean, it's really nothing short of, change everything, but I guess
long-term goals.
Long-term goals, yes. Okay, so I think for the purposes of tonight, because people are going to break into groups and talk about this, I think what we can do is recognize that we don't have a problem of the work generating value. Anyone who's been here a long time understands what the kind of work that we're talking about, the value it's generating, on top of the fact that if the work is done properly and if equity is centering it, then the technology itself is going to be forged into something that has a different structure and a different value system in and of itself. So that's the part of it that we have to understand is actually really valuable to people who need to make, they are making products that actually count on the idea of hooking into a literate and engaged public about tools and entire new languages that we really aren't ready for. So there really is opportunity right now, but most especially if there's anything I can leave in anyone's mind tonight, data sovereignty. Just go home, look it up, think about it. There's never been a resource that's pulsing through public space that's worth as much as crude oil. And yet, we really are not in any organized fashion doing anything with it. Part of the reason immersive media is so important is that as soon as you use it to understand and see what's in the digital commons, it makes you go back and recognize it was only when we created land commons that small businesses were able to really access making major change in an economy for regular people. We have a digital commons need that is everything from the ability to make, interpret, read, and write in this world, as well as to publish in it, thrive in it, have work in it. And the really hopeful truth is that the technology that we're creating here, whether it's the computing speed of the AI that we're creating, if only there were an investment in that without a stockholder outcome as the God you serve, but only public good, there is enough value pulsing through both the creative intersection of that and the data itself to afford to fund it. So if we were to ramp in a structure that knew what to do with that value when it got here, we could do something collectively in community that no other city has quite succeeded at yet, but they're all hinting at edges of it. That to me is the creative economy is about creative economics and the use of tech tools to change the economy itself. And it is the people who know what time it is, whether it's people in the global south who created the whole category of mobile banking because it served their needs. We need to look at what it is that are our most radical needs as a city, because those will create extraordinary tech tools that actually will serve regular people.
I mean, as someone who's traveled the world a whole bunch, what are some uses of creative economics that you've seen that you think that could maybe be employed here successfully? Are there any?
Well, I know Sabrina Roach is in the room, and she knows that I'm going to say there is such an enormous opportunity right now to build very locally defined mesh networks to address communications needs and really not only communications, but the ability to exchange value locally. There are experiments in that going on all over the world in places where, even though people try all kinds of creative bond issues and public benefit authorities, we try everything and we grow, but regular people are sinking. And there are ways in which the very smarts that an algorithm could outperform a mutual fund manager. Why wouldn't you use that to solve childhood asthma in a neighborhood with too many trucks? So those things are happening around the world, and there can be enormous amounts of value created if it's created in the communities that are facing those issues.
So running Northwest Film Forum, one of the issues that we have, and we're constantly like, how do we get tech to care about art? Thoughts? Are there people you've seen converted, like who are like, oh, I didn't get it. Now after talking to you about the value of arts, I suddenly get it.
I mean, I've seen that with the students that I'm working with. I think one of the coolest moments as a teaching artist was talking to like a kid who just showed up for gaming, and And he was absolutely like, I don't need to know anything about filmmaking. I don't need to know anything about storytelling. And I was like, oh my goodness. But the moment we had like a light bulb moment when he started to see that storytelling and personhood and character development, all of those things make tech even more exciting, even more revelatory. That when you have those moments where there's an intersection where it creates better human communication, then I think that's how we get to that place, you know? But I also think that there has to be said, inherently, we've got to talk about the common good versus, you know, getting an output, you know. We need to get to a place where it can be about sustaining the society we live in. Maybe these kids won't make this thing that you can sell this year, but maybe they'll go on to do something in the future, you know? Maybe they'll feel more comfortable in these spaces. And when we think about it in that way, that we are like nourishing the next generation versus creating something that we can profit off of immediately, I think then we get to a better world, you know? Then we get to do some things where we alleviate the other systems of oppression, you know, like displacement, when we're talking about like the lack of mental health facilities, drug addiction, we get those things, but we also have a way that people can communicate with one another. As an African, my father's people, the Hero people, my clan, we are storytellers, you know, and that's how we keep our history. It means that when we had a genocide, my dad's clan managed to keep our story alive. And regardless of where you are, I think people have, those communities have storytelling at their heart. And people will eventually leave this place. People will eventually be displaced. But if we have things like, I think that you guys have been working on some stuff about like the historic Central District and you know, Red Apple, and having these stories be there regardless. It doesn't matter that those places don't exist anymore. The stories are there.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that project a little bit?
Well, I want to add to that point and say that because that archive story is cared for, and it will be in the analog world, but we also want to make sure that Google's DeepMind, when it is writing the story of 23rd and Jackson, that people have had an opportunity to interact, that we want to give portals to open relationship with the machine and an understanding of what it means, that it's our history, it's our archive. I just wanted to say this. You asked how do we get tech to care about art, and I know you were like putting a sort of tongue-in-cheek there. And I just wanted to say, I think that there's not a distinction of tech and art. Like, I know many incredible artists who work at tech companies, and I sometimes have tech companies as clients. And at that moment, I'm still an artist working in tech. So I know many creative technologists wouldn't want to live with that. So I want to acknowledge that, first of all. And I think what we're really saying is, I mean, when you're making a VR piece, you're a creative technologist and an artist, and you know, and many things. So it's not so much whether we're talking about making tech care about art. It's when we're talking about people, when we're talking about whether or not something is funded in a system that's just about an outcome that's about profit. No matter how groovy a healthcare application of a technology might appear, at the end of the day, if it's for stockholders, it's for stockholders. So maybe the appeal really is more about, we see the value we create together, could we convert it differently? Could the conversion look different than it did in the 90s when so much wealth was created, but it was pulled out by almost entirely real estate and tech? So it didn't get reinvested. And if the value that's being created in one arts core class were reinvested in that community, I trust that community will sort itself out. You know, if it's not extracted from, then that community will convert its own economy quite handily.
I think the irony is that tech companies are the companies that can actually sustain this model. I mean, nonprofits are great, but they also require money in order to fund their projects. And when you have something like a large company that is doing billions and billions and billions of dollars, they are able to do something consistently. There's something so incredibly empowering about not having to tell my students, oh, you can make it as like a black woman in this industry, but actually physically being there. But at the same time, that also means that there are other kids in that class that aren't getting that same thing, you know? And when we do generationally, like when we think about a long-term project, you can have teachers that are trans women that are actually given the tools that they need to succeed in teaching, you know? And we can have people supported in a way that means that they don't have to worry about their rent, you know? They don't have to work like 3 side jobs. It's sustainable. So, I mean, I think perhaps the dichotomy of like tech versus humanities perhaps where like we need to start thinking about it. Like why is there that binary?
That's a good question, yeah. I like that. Part of the reason we're having these conversations is to kind of give recommendations to the city as to what the city could do. And I'm wondering if you all have any thoughts there in terms of maybe even how the city could engage with the tech sector. I mean, I have some thoughts. I feel like the city could help facilitate some of these conversations, perhaps. But
Okay, I wrote a couple of things down because you asked this question before, and I know people are going to go have discussions, and it's important, to have frameworks for them. A couple of quick thoughts from my perspective. The city can fundamentally, we also have to decide what the questions are. And in the what is the question? If the question is what can we do about the fact that there is, we are a tale of two cities right now. That is a reality. The tents and cranes are popping up together, and we know that. And if we're addressing that honestly, if there's any number one thing that a government can play a role in, it's in how policy does or doesn't encourage different kinds of activity in collective community. Individualism is an enormous part of the problem. So it seems to me that we have to start with the policies and the very best intentions that we've played out in the 20th century clearly didn't work for this problem. So one thing is, let's stop doing whatever was the same old, like you get this kind of tax break if you do this incentive, we do this workforce training program, because if we're not changing the size of the pie and we're just slicing a few different children get an opportunity, then I don't see where all of that good government would come to anything. So one idea would be we would agree that the problem is we actually have to have a different framework on the notion of work. We know that the future of work is changing. We know that the gig economy is really difficult for the people who are doing the gigs. So I think the city could look at questions about, in a sort of open, transparent laboratory way, where the results are collectively owned by the producers, that the communities could look at even low-hanging fruit ideas that cities are trying around the country and around the world. Whether some of it is, if some of you have heard of this term, smart cities, where cities are looking at open data platforms and what those can mean for transportation, mobility. But a lot of that value of all of that is sitting there, but there was no investment in people on the ground creating tools that actually mean something to their community. Whether those are things that are called smart contracts that might make it easier to start a small business, like all of the places where we are ready in a wonderful way as a city to pop, because people on the ground have lots of projects shovel ready for changing their structure. They just need the right kind of being met by really innovative government. So I do think that it's an enormous time of opportunity to look at that, but using creative tech tools in structures that are created to be capacity building on the ground is the answer. We have to decentralize the power and the resources, but centralize a strategy toward the city together. I think that's the right answer, is that combination. And it's my hope that what might bubble up from all these discussions are people's knowledge from all around the city and different communities where there's a conversion opportunity for great value.
I think if we're thinking about how to get folks who are typically not in the rooms and keep them there, we've got to accept that even if we give one student all the tech that they can get and and just all the knowledge that they can get, that at the end of the day, they still need to get a job, you know? and they can't, you know, intern, and they will need extra stuff. And at the end of the day, like, if your space is not safe for white women who are heterosexual, then perhaps it's not going to be helpful for other folks. You know, like, we got to start to think about what our spaces can do to our students. You know, if this kid gets all the tech but is miserable every day, that kid isn't having a good life. You know, like, we want to talk about, like, experiences. We want joy, we want creativity, but, like, creativity isn't, like, fostered in a laboratory. It requires students, I guess, they're just, we don't want to commodify people's identities. We want to just kind of let them live their lives. We want it to be sustainable. We want them to be able to be fed. And it requires, like, having jobs. It requires making money. It requires being able to pay your rent.
Cool. I actually haven't a thought that I want to put out there. I feel like there's I've been doing a lot of tech talks about diversity in filmmaking at different tech organizations around town. And we're finding a lot of tech organizations are like, oh, we have all these, like, people who can crunch data. Do you have any projects? Because they actually want real projects. So, like, finding the places where artists' needs or artists' skills might be useful and where tech can help that and also benefit themselves, I think would be a good place to start as well. Anything else other than that? I think we're about out of time.